The Alpha King had moved on after she left. That is what I told myself. That is what I told my beta, my council, my pack. I said it so many times and in so many rooms that eventually I almost believed it. Almost. I did not move on. I endured. Those are different things, and any man who has lost his fated mate knows the difference intimately. Her name was Ilara Voss. She had dark hair that curled at the ends when the humidity was high, eyes the color of deep river water, a laugh that came from low in her chest and arrived without warning. She had been the daughter of my father's most trusted advisor, raised inside the walls of Ashford Keep, and I had known her most of my life before I understood what she was to me. The recognition came the summer I turned 26, a warmth in the sternum, a pull like a tide in the blood, a certainty so complete it had no edges. My wolf knew before I finished speaking her name at the harvest gathering. He rose inside me, not in aggression, not in hunger, but in something quieter and more irreversible than either of those things. A settling. A coming home to a place you did not know you had been missing. We had 4 months together before everything broke. I will not dress up what I was in those days. I was a new Alpha King, barely 2 years from my coronation, and I ran the Ashford territory with a combination of inherited rule and personal intimidation that I mistook for strength. I held the line on the northern borders against the Crane pack. I managed the political weight of 3 lesser alphas who had sworn fealty, and then spent every season quietly testing its limits. I was decisive, I was present, and I was, if I am honest, brutal in the way young kings who have not yet been broken tend to be. I was not gentle with Ilara. I do not mean I was cruel. I was never cruel to her. But I was careless in the way powerful men are careless with people they love, assuming that love alone is architecture enough to hold a life inside, that feeling strongly is the same thing as building well. I canceled 3 evenings in a row without explanation when the Crane pack negotiations turned violent. I asked her to be patient in a tone that was really a command. When she finally tried to tell me what she needed, I listened with half of myself and promised with all of myself, and she was wise enough to understand the difference even if I was not. She left in the last week of October. No confrontation, no ultimatum, no dramatic exit that I could have metabolized more easily. She simply was not there one morning. Her rooms were cleared. Her few things were gone. My beta, Declan, brought me her note an hour before a council meeting I could not cancel. The note said, "I cannot be the thing that waits for you to have room for it. You are a good man and a good king. I need you to be both of those things for your people. I am going somewhere I can be more than a patient woman." I read it twice, I folded it, I went to my council meeting. I did not go after her, and I have carried that decision like a stone in the chest ever since. The years after Ilara were functional. That is the most generous word I have for them. I led well. My pack grew. The Crane pack conflict resolved bloodily, definitively. I built the trade road between Ashford and the Western Territory that my father had argued about for 20 years and never completed. I was present. I was capable. I was the Alpha King in every room I entered, and I left no room that was not better ordered than when I arrived. My wolf went silent. Not dead, I would have known if that had happened, felt it like a limb removed. He simply stopped speaking, pulled back to some interior place, and waited in the dark with the patience of something very old, and I did not know whether to be grateful or frightened by his stillness. Declan told me twice, and then never again, that I should look for her. That fated bonds did not simply dissolve because the human parties had made a mess of things. I told him the first time that it was not his place. I told him the second time nothing, just looked at him until he stopped talking. He was my beta and my oldest friend, and even he understood there were rooms in me that were not for entering. 3 years passed, and then another 2, and I moved on in the way a river moves on after you dam it, not gone, only rerouted, pressure building somewhere underground, finding the cracks. 5 years after she left, in the 3rd week of September, I drove the back road through Millhaven, to inspect the new border markings my council had submitted for approval. Millhaven was a small town. It had a main street the width of a creek, a general store with a hand-painted sign, 3 restaurants that were really one restaurant operating under different names depending on the season, and a weekend market that set up under the oak trees in the square. I was not there to spend time in the town. I was there for the border survey and nothing else. I would be gone in 90 minutes. I parked near the market. It was running. Autumn vendors, pumpkins and preserves and hand-thrown pottery. I walked the edge of it on my way to meet the survey crew, not paying particular attention to the stalls or the people browsing them. And then my wolf woke up. Not gradually, not the slow warming I had felt the first time. This was instantaneous and total, like a match struck in a room full of gas. A flash that lit every nerve at once, and I stopped walking in the middle of the market path and stood there like a fool while the world rearranged itself around the thing I was suddenly and completely certain of. She was here. The scent hit me half a second later, which was already too late because I had already known. 5 years of silence, 5 years of a wolf standing still in the dark waiting for exactly this moment, and now he was not standing still anymore. He was pressing forward from behind my ribs with a force that was not aggression but was just as physical, just as difficult to hold back. I turned. She was 20 feet away, at a pottery stall with her back partially to me. The dark hair was shorter now. She was wearing a coat I did not recognize, a warm brown thing with the collar turned up against the September air. She was leaning slightly forward over a display of mugs, asking the vendor something, and I recognized the angle of her shoulders and the way she tilted her head to listen to the answer with her whole body. And then she straightened up and stepped back, and I saw what was beside her. 2 boys, small, 3 years old perhaps, or just turning 4. Standing close to her legs, not hiding behind them but positioned with the casual confidence of children who trust completely that their mother is a reliable fixed point in the universe. They were identical in the way twins are identical, same dark hair, same serious eyes, and I understood in the space of a single breath what I was looking at, and the understanding arrived not as a thought but as a physical event. My wolf slammed forward so hard I had to brace a hand against the nearest stall post. 2 boys, her eyes, her hair, and something else, something I recognized from the inside, something that belonged to me. I do not remember crossing the 20 feet between us. I remember standing still, and then I remember being close enough to see the exact moment she turned, drawn by some instinct of her own, and saw me. The color drained from her face. For a moment neither of us spoke. The market moved around us, voices, a child laughing somewhere behind me, the smell of cider boiling in a pot at the next stall. The world just continued, indifferent to the fact that mine had just stopped and restarted at a different frequency. "Elara," I said. It was the only word I had. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I could not entirely read. Fear, yes, but not of me. Something else underneath the fear. Something that looked almost like relief, which I did not know what to do with. "Callan," she said. One of the boys looked up at the sound of my name, curious, unafraid. I pulled my gaze from her face and looked at him. At them. At the 2 boys watching me with dark eyes that were my own eyes in a face that was not. I said, "How old are they?" I already knew. I had already done the arithmetic in the walk across the market, the seconds between recognition and arrival, and the answer was the same every time. But I needed to hear it. I needed her to say it in words I could hold. She swallowed. 3, they'll be 4 in January. I counted the months. I counted them again, and then I looked at her and my wolf was no longer pressing. He had gone very still again, but it was a different kind of still, not the dormant silence of the past 5 years, but the absolute focus of something that has found its purpose and is now simply waiting to act. "You left," I said. "You left and you knew." I didn't know when I left. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to make it steady. I found out 2 weeks later. By then, she stopped, started again. By then I had already decided you were better without me present, and I thought, another stop. I thought it would be easier. Easier, I said. For the pack, she said. For the succession, For you, I said, say it. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, yes. For me too. One of the boys, the one on the right, the one who had looked up at my name, was still watching me. He had not moved closer and he had not moved away. He just watched with those dark eyes that were mine, steady and unself-conscious, the way children are before the world teaches them to hide their attention. I crouched down to his level. It was not a calculated thing. It was the only thing I could do with my body in that moment that did not involve breaking something. "What's your name?" I asked. "Fen," he said. His voice was serious. "That one's Ro." He indicated his brother with a minimal gesture, the kind of efficiency children use when they've spent 3 years identifying each other to adults. "Fen," I said, "that's a good name." "Mum chose it," he said. "Your mum chooses well," I said. He considered this with great seriousness, as if it were a claim that warranted evaluation. Then he nodded once, apparently satisfied. I stood back up. Ilara was watching me with her arms crossed loosely in front of her, not a defensive position exactly, more the stance of someone holding themselves steady against something they expected might knock them sideways. "We need to talk," I said. "I know," she said. "Not here." "I know," she said again. I looked at my sons. My sons. The word had no prior rehearsal, no framework to settle into, and it landed inside me like a stone into deep water, gone from sight almost immediately, but the ripples not stopping. Fen was watching the pottery vendor now, apparently having classified me as not immediately relevant to the next few minutes of his life, which was a judgment I respected. Ro was still watching his mother with the focused attention of a child trying to take her temperature from across a short distance. He was afraid. Not of me, he hadn't looked at me with fear, only with the careful attention children give to new things. He was afraid for her. Even at 3 years old, that boy was reading his mother's tension and staying close. Something compressed in my chest that had nothing to do with the bond, and everything to do with the simple fact of watching a child quietly protect the person he loved. I said, "Are you here alone?" "My friend Petra is nearby. She has a stall." Ilara tilted her head toward the far end of the market. "Can she take the boys for an hour?" A pause. She looked at her sons, then at me. Something moved through her expression that I could not name, not the relief I had seen before, not the fear. Something older than both of those things and more private. "Yes," she said, "she can." We found Petra, a tall, sharp-eyed woman who looked at me with the frank assessment of someone who had heard the entire history and formed opinions about it. And Ilara spoke to her in a low voice while I crouched again near the boys and let Fen explain to me, with great thoroughness, the differences between the 2 pottery mugs he was considering. He had opinions, strong ones. Ro eventually drifted closer and added commentary that was mostly contradictory, and for 6 minutes I sat on my heels in a market in Millhaven learning the ceramic preferences of my sons, and I was not the alpha king in those 6 minutes. I was just a man who had missed the first 3 years of this, and was starting to understand the specific shape of what that meant. Ilara touched my shoulder. "We're set." I straightened, said goodbye to the boys, who received this with the pragmatic brevity of 3-year-olds who had other things to attend to. We walked to the edge of the market, to a bench beneath the last of the oak trees, where the noise of the vendors was present but not overwhelming. She sat. I sat beside her and left a deliberate distance. "I don't want to fight," she said. "I'm not here to fight," I said. She looked at me sideways. "You look like you want to fight." "I look like I've been hit by something moving at considerable speed," I said. That's different. A breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. Then, I should have told you, I know that. I've known it since. She stopped. I told myself so many things, that it was better for them to have a consistent life. That bringing them into Ashford, into that world with all the politics and the danger and the... She stopped again. With me, I said. She was quiet for a moment. You were not a gentle man, Callan. No, I said, I wasn't. I didn't know if you'd changed. I didn't know if... She turned her hands over in her lap, a gesture I recognized from 5 years ago, the one she made when she was trying to find the honest center of something. I told myself I was protecting them. I think I was also protecting myself from having to find out. I sat with that for a long time, longer than I would have once. 5 years ago I would have spoken over the discomfort of it, would have moved immediately to what I needed, and how she was wrong and what was going to happen next. I had learned, in the years she was not there to watch me, that the silence after a truth someone has trusted you with is part of the answer. I was hard, I said, and I was careless with you. Not cruel, I want to say that. I want you to know I know the difference. But careless in the way I only understood after you were gone, and I had no one to be careless with. She looked at me. I've thought about that note for 5 years, I said. Every line of it. You were right about all of it. Being right about it didn't make it easier, she said quietly. No, I said, I expect not. We sat in the shade of the oak tree, and the market moved around the edges of us, and neither of us spoke for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have known each other in a real way, who have been inside each other's defenses and seen what lives there, and are taking the measure of who they are now compared to who they were. They're mine, I said. Not a question. Yes. I want to be in their lives. She nodded slowly, not immediately, not reflexively, thought at first, then nodded. I know, she said. I think I always knew this day would happen eventually. I just didn't know, she looked at her hands. I didn't know what version of you would show up. What version did? I asked. She looked at me for a long, evaluating moment. Then, a quieter one, I'll give you that. I almost smiled. It was not the time, but it was close to the time. I said, can I meet them properly? Not today, today is too much, but soon. She looked toward Petra's stall, where I could see 2 small heads moving around the display tables, with the focused chaos of young children loose among breakable things. They don't know about you, she said. Not who you are. I told them their father was, I said he was away, that he led people who needed him. That sentence arrived differently than I expected. Not as an accusation. Somehow she had told them a truth that did not make me a villain, and I did not know what to do with that kindness, which I was not sure I had earned. What do you want them to know? I asked. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that a vendor a few stalls over made 2 complete sales while we sat there. The truth, she said finally, an age-appropriate version of it. I don't want them to grow up with a story that has to be unmade later. Then let me help you tell it, I said, when you're ready. When they're ready. She looked at me again with that unreadable expression. Then, slowly, some of the heldness went out of her shoulders, and I realized how much effort it had been costing her to sit here and keep herself braced against whatever version of this conversation she had been prepared for. Okay, she said. That was all. That single word, and it was the largest thing anyone had said to me in 5 years. I sat there for another 10 minutes after she stood to collect the boys from Petra. I did not follow immediately. I needed the minutes. The oak tree above me was dropping leaves in the easy, random way of trees in early autumn, not a rush, just the slow, persistent letting go, and I sat beneath it and tried to put the morning into some order my mind could hold. I had sons. 2 of them, 3 years and 9 months old, which was 3 years and 9 months of their lives I had not been present for. First words I had not heard. First steps I had not witnessed. Every small catastrophe and small triumph of early childhood, every fever and every laugh, every night one of them could not sleep. All of it had happened without me, in rooms I had never seen, in a house I had not known existed, in a town I had no reason to visit. I thought about the note. I cannot be the thing that waits for you to have room for it. She had written that before she knew. She had made her decision, packed her life into whatever fit, and left not to hurt me, not from cruelty or calculation, but from the simple self-preservation of a woman who had finally understood that loving someone is not the same as being safe with them. She had left, and 2 weeks later she had found out she was carrying 2 lives, and she had looked at that fact, and decided that bringing them back into the orbit of the man who had been careless with their mother was not a risk she could take. I could be angry about that. Part of me wanted to be angry about it, wanted the clean, simple fuel of it, the forward motion. But I sat under the oak tree and I thought about the last 4 days of October 5 years ago, when she was gone, and I was in my council meetings and my border negotiations and the work of being king, and I asked myself honestly, if she had come back with that news, if she had appeared in my doorway 8 weeks after leaving and said, "I am carrying your children," what would I have done? I would have brought her back inside the keep. I would have arranged the quarters and the security and the announcement to the council. I would have done all of it with precision and care, and the same thorough efficiency with which I approached every other problem that required a solution. I would not have known how to be what she needed, not then, not the man I was then. She had known that. She had known it before I did. I stood up from the bench and walked to the edge of the market where I could see her. She was wrapping the boys back into their coats. Finn had his on inside out and was resistant to correction. And Petra was saying something to her in a low voice with her hand on Alara's arm, and Alara was nodding with the focused exhaustion of someone who has been holding a difficult thing carefully for a long time, and is only now beginning to let the weight of it show. I did not approach. I had said what needed to be said for today. The rest was going to be built slowly, one thing at a time, the way my sons apparently built fortresses, with intention and patience, one piece placed correctly before the next. I walked back to my car and drove the survey road and stood at the border markers for 45 minutes and looked at the lines on the ground that told the world where my territory ended and the rest of the world began. And I thought about how the most important line I had ever drawn was not in the ground at all, but in the choice I made at the oak tree bench. The choice to say I am not asking for anything and mean it. My surveyor explained 3 different boundary options. I approved the second one. He seemed pleased. I drove home. Declan was waiting. He appeared in 7 minutes, which was fast even for him, and I told him what had happened, and he sat in the chair across from my desk and said nothing for a full minute. Then he said, "You have sons." "I have sons," I said. "Twin sons." "Twin sons," I confirmed. He put his hands over his face for a moment. I let him have this. "You have to bring them into the pack line," he said when he emerged. "I know. The council is going to." "I know what the council is going to do," I said. "We'll manage the council." "And Alara." I looked out the window at the dark where the tree line was. "That's not mine to manage. That's mine to earn." He was quiet for a moment. "You've changed," he said. "Millhaven did 5 years of work in about 40 minutes, I said. He nodded slowly. "What's her situation up there? Is she safe? Does she have pack protection?" "She has a friend with strong opinions about pottery," I said. "I don't know what she has in terms of protection." "That's not good enough," Declan said immediately. "If word gets to the Crane remnants that the Alpha King has fated mate cubs living unprotected in an unaffiliated settlement." He did not need to finish that. I had already been running that calculation since the drive home. The Crane pack had been broken 3 years ago, but its remnants were not organized and were therefore, in some ways, more dangerous, scattered, grievance-fueled, looking for any leverage they could press. A fated Alpha King's unmated bond partner, living outside his territory with his children. It was a liability, and I had put it there myself 5 years ago by being the kind of man a woman could not stay with. Start quiet inquiries, I said. Nothing official. I want to know who else knows she's there, what her situation is, whether there are any border watchers who might have started paying attention. Already noted, Declan said. He stood, Callan. I looked at him. She let you talk to them, he said. She called them Finn and Ro. He paused. She kept a door open. Even when she left, she kept a door open. I said nothing. That's not nothing, he said. That's actually the whole thing. He left, and I sat in my office in the dark for a long time, looking at the tree line, thinking about a 3-year-old boy explaining the structural differences between two mugs to a man he had never met, with the calm certainty that this was a topic worth explaining. I went back to Millhaven 4 days later. Not to see Alara. I had messaged her the day before, asked if a brief visit was acceptable, and she had said yes, but only at the park by the river where the boys had space to be themselves. She was not hiding from me. She was making sure her sons had an exit if they needed one, which was sound parenting, and I told her so when I arrived, and she looked briefly startled. We spent 2 hours at the park. I pushed Ro on the swing for what felt like the better part of one of those hours, because once the task was assigned to me, it was apparently permanent. Finn built something with sticks that he described as a fortress, and that looked to me like a collection of sticks, but his architectural intent was clear and committed. Alara sat on a bench at the edge of the green and watched the three of us with her arms wrapped loosely around herself. And once, when I looked back at her between swing pushes, she was not looking at the boys. She was looking at me. I did not say anything about it. It was not yet time to say anything about it, but I noted it with the careful attention of a man who has learned the difference between moving fast and moving well. On the drive back, I took a call from Declan. "We have a problem," he said. I knew from his tone that it was not a small problem. "Tell me." The Crane remnants, specifically a faction calling themselves the Varro Brotherhood, about 14 wolves, operating out of the old Crane Eastern Border Territory. They have a leader named Breck. Mean, organized, and apparently not entirely unaware of the fated Bond situation. How not unaware? They have a name, Declan said. Alara Voss, and apparently a general location, northern settlement, small town. They don't have Millhaven yet, but they're searching. I was on the highway. I kept my speed steady, which cost me something. How long before they find it? If they're actively looking, a week, maybe 10 days. Pull the border survey team, I said. Quietly. I want 6 wolves I trust in Millhaven by tomorrow morning, not in pack colors. Civilian presence only. They live there, they shop there, they are not obviously protection. And call Alara. You want me to call her? I want you to call her and tell her I'm on my way back tonight, and that I need to speak with her without the boys present, and I need her to understand that this is not a negotiation about custody or about us. This is a threat, and I need to tell her about it. Silence on the line. Then, she's not going to like this. No, I said, she's not. Tell her anyway. I called in 3 favors that night, all from alphas who owed me and who I had never called on before, and I was in Millhaven before midnight. Alara met me at the door of a small house on a quiet street, the house she lived in, her house, with a porch light on and a sleeping quiet behind the windows that told me the boys were in bed. She was not happy. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression tight, and she said, "Tell me." I told her all of it. No softening, no reframing. The Varro Brotherhood, Breck, the 14 wolves, the timeline. I watched her face move through fear and then past fear into something harder and more useful. "My sons," she said. "Yes," I said, "that's why I'm here tonight." "You're not asking me to come to Ashford." "I'm telling you the threat exists," I said. What you do with that information is your decision. You are not my property, Alara. You are not my subject. I am not going to move you like a piece on a board." She looked at me for a long moment, "But," she said, "but if you chose to come to Ashford temporarily, while I deal with the Varro group, your sons would be inside the most defended territory in this region, with a pack of 200 wolves between them and anything that wanted to reach them. And I would be there." The last 4 words came out quieter than the rest. She uncrossed her arms, looked at the dark street, looked back at me. "Petra comes," she said. "Done. The boys don't know why we're moving. We tell them it's a visit. No fear, no emergency." "Agreed." "And I'm not," she stopped, started again with more care. "I'm not coming back to you, Callan, not because of this, not because of the bond. If that ever happens, it happens because it's right, not because I had nowhere else to go." "I know," I said. "Say it like you know it," she said. I looked at her. "You are coming to Ashford because your sons need to be safe and I can make them safe. That is the entire reason. You owe me nothing. You are not returning to anything." Something in her face softened, just slightly, just enough. "Okay," she said, "tomorrow morning." There was a council meeting I had to manage before any of this could move forward. I had known it was coming the moment I told Declan. He was beta, which meant he was also, in practice, my primary political buffer between me and the 8 wolves who sat on the Ashford Council, and believed with some justification that they were entitled to prior notice of any decision that affected the pack's succession line. The meeting was the following morning. I went in before they had time to arrange themselves around a position, and I told them directly, "I have located my fated mate. She has been living outside Ashford territory for 5 years. She has 2 sons, my sons, twins, nearly 4 years old. They will be brought into Ashford territory temporarily for security reasons, with the intention of establishing permanent recognition and formal succession status for both boys as my heirs." The room was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then all 8 of them spoke at once. I let them run for about 2 minutes. This was a technique I had developed over years, not interrupting the first wave, because the first wave was mostly air and noise, and the actual substantive concerns always arrived in the second wave, after the reflexive political reactions had cleared. Councillor Marin went first in the second wave, as she almost always did. She was the oldest of them and the sharpest, and she had the particular gift of being able to identify the real question inside whatever noise currently filled the room. "The boys are legitimate heirs," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement she was making so that everyone in the room would hear it from her mouth before they heard it from anyone with a contrary agenda. "Fated bond confirmed," I said. "My wolf recognized them." She nodded. "Then the question of legitimacy is settled." She looked around the table at her fellow counselors with an expression that clearly communicated that the question of legitimacy was settled, and anyone who wanted to relitigate it would be doing so with Marin, which was not a comfortable position to occupy. "The mother," said Counselor Draff. He was the most politically cautious of the 8, which made him useful and occasionally exhausting. "She's been outside pack territory for 5 years. There will be commentary about." "There will be commentary," I agreed. "People who want to make something of it will make something of it. I am not particularly concerned about what those people think." The Alpha King's fated mate living independently outside his territory for 5 years while carrying his heirs suggests a rift in the bond, Draft began. "The rift," I said, "was in me. She left because I gave her reason to. I am telling you this plainly because I would rather this council heard it from me than from speculation. She left, she built a life, she raised 2 good sons on her own. She is returning to Ashford territory temporarily for security reasons, and because she has chosen to allow me the chance to demonstrate that I have become a better version of myself than the one she left. That is the situation. If anyone has a problem with any part of that, I would invite them to bring it to me directly rather than through the pack's various informal communication channels. Marin made a small sound that might have been approval. Draft looked at his hands. The remaining 6 said nothing, which was its own kind of consensus. The boys will need formal introduction to the pack, Marin said. Not immediately let them settle, but within the month something appropriate. They should know their place here before they are old enough to question it. Agreed, I said. And the mother, she pressed, not unkindly, just precisely. That proceeds at her pace, I said. No announcements, no formal status, no pressure. She is here as a guest of the Alpha King and will be treated accordingly, with every courtesy and no expectation. Marin studied me for a long moment. She had been on my father's council before she was on mine, and she had watched me from the age of 12, and sometimes the weight of that history was visible in how she looked at me. Good, she said, that's the right answer. The meeting adjourned. Declan fell into step beside me in the corridor. Marin's on your side, he said. Marin is on the pack's side, I said. She's the same person she's always been. Right now those are the same thing, he said. Right now, I agreed. It took 2 days to move them. Petra turned out to be formidable in the logistics of a rapid relocation. She had the house packed, and the arrangements made with a thoroughness that made me quietly revise my initial assessment of her upward several degrees. The boys treated the move as an adventure, which Alara handled with a steadiness I recognized as the kind that costs something but does not show the cost. Ashford Keep received them on a Tuesday morning. I had the West Wing guest quarters opened, separate entrance, private garden, no requirement to interact with the council or any official function. Fenn immediately identified the garden as a superior fortress site and began surveying it with great seriousness. Rose stood in the middle of the guest hall and looked at the ceiling and said, carefully, "It's very big." "It is," I said. He looked at me. "Do you live here?" "I do." He nodded, processing this. "Is this your house?" "Yes." Another nod. Then, "Mum said you lead people." "That's right." "Do you like it?" The question landed somewhere I had not expected. Not because it was profound, he was 3.5, but because it was so direct, so stripped of performance, the way children ask things before they learn that asking directly is considered rude by adults who are afraid of the answers. "Some days," I said. "Some days I like it a lot, some days it's hard." He absorbed this with great seriousness. Then, "Mum says hard things are how you get strong." "Your mum," I said, "is right about a lot of things." He looked at me for another moment. Then he went to find his brother. The Varro Brotherhood made their move 6 days later. They had found Millhaven 3 days after we left it. I heard from my border wolves, and upon finding the house empty, they had accelerated their search. Breck, apparently, was not patient. He had something to prove and a pack of 14 wolves who believed in what he was proving, and he pushed toward Ashford territory with the blunt certainty of a man who had spent 3 years telling himself a story about why he was owed something. They crossed my eastern border at night, 14 wolves, Breck at the front. My scouts had them before they were a mile inside the line. I met them in the field between the border and the first Ashford settlement. Not alone. I had Declan and 8 of my best wolves, but I positioned myself ahead, which was a message. Breck was a large man, heavy through the shoulders, with the particular set of a wolf who had been alpha of something for long enough that it had worked its way into how he stood. He stopped when he saw me, and I saw him do the calculation, who he was looking at, what that meant, whether the story he had been telling himself about the evening's outcome was going to survive the next few minutes. "Alpha King," he said. "Breck," I said, "you're on my land." "I'm looking for something that belongs to the Crane line," he said. "A woman and 2 pups. We have a claim." "You have no claim," I said. "The Crane pack was dissolved 3 years ago. There is no Crane line. Blood debt, he said. The woman was sheltered by Crane territory for 5 years. That's nothing, I said. That's a story you built to give yourself a reason. She paid no debt, she took no shelter, she had no arrangement with Crane remnants. His jaw tightened. The pups are mine, I said. The field went quiet in a way that was more than the absence of speech. Even the wind seemed to pause. Breck stared at me. I could see him revising rapidly, unwillingly, working through what this declaration meant for every part of his plan. The Alpha Kings, he started. My sons, I said, my fated mate, my family. And you are standing on my land with 14 wolves, which is a decision you are going to have to live with for the rest of your life, one way or another. I am giving you the option of it being a long life. He was silent. Beside him, his 14 wolves had gone very still in the particular way of wolves who are beginning to run the same calculation their leader is running, and not loving the results. The Crane line is dead, I said. The debt you think you are owed does not exist. Go home. Build something real. Stop spending your years on a grudge that was never going to pay what you thought it would. I stepped forward. Breck did not step back, which was pride, and I understood pride, but I watched his wolves and 2 of them shifted their weight backward before they could stop themselves, which was the real information. Last chance, I said. After this I stopped talking. He held for another 3 seconds. It was a long 3 seconds. Then he looked at his wolves and then back at me, and the calculation completed itself on his face, and it came out the way it always comes out when you do the arithmetic honestly. He stepped back. This isn't finished, he said. Yes, it is, I said. You just don't know it yet. They left not quickly. Breck took his time, which was the last piece of dignity available to him, and I let him have it, walked back across my line at the pace of a man who was choosing to leave rather than a man who had been defeated, and his wolves followed, and the night absorbed them. I stayed in the field for several minutes after they were gone, not from caution, though caution was warranted. I stayed because there is a particular quality of silence that follows a thing that could have gone much worse, and it is worth standing in that silence long enough to feel its full weight. 14 wolves. Breck was formidable and his grievance was real, even if his claim was not. In another version of this night, one where Ilara and the boys were still in Millhaven, unprotected, where Breck had moved first and I had moved second, the outcome would have been different. Not necessarily in terms of the final result. I would have gotten them back. I would have made sure of that. But the cost would have been different. The damage would have been different. She had been living 5 years outside my territory without any protection I knew about, and I had not known to provide it because I had not known she was there, and I had not known she was there because I had been too proud and too broken to go after her when she left. Every choice in that chain led to this field, these 14 wolves, this particular version of the night that could have gone badly. I did not enjoy the accounting, but I did not look away from it either. Declan came up beside me and said nothing for a long moment. Breck will regroup, he said eventually. I know, I said, but not here and not at them. Have the border wolves stay on him for 6 months. If he crosses into any allied territory, we coordinate response. Done, Declan said. I turned and walked back toward the keep. Ilara was in the garden when I returned. It was past midnight, past the time the boys would have been asleep for hours, and she was sitting on the stone bench in the garden with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of something warm in her hands. The garden light caught the side of her face and the dark water color of her eyes, and I stopped in the garden doorway and looked at her. She had known. Of course she had known. I had told Declan to keep her informed without details she didn't need, but she had clearly guessed the shape of the evening. How did it go? She asked. They left. She nodded, looked down at her cup. Will they come back? Not here, I said, not to them. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Thank you." I crossed the garden and sat on the bench beside her, leaving space. "You don't have to thank me. They're my sons." "I know," she said. "I wasn't thanking you for that. I was thanking you for—" She stopped, looked for the word. "For how you handled it, for telling me what was happening instead of just handling it without me. For not—" She stopped again. "For not being the version of me you were afraid of," I said quietly. She looked at me, then, "Yes, that." We sat in the garden in the dark for a long time. The keep was quiet around us. Somewhere inside, my sons were asleep in rooms I had opened for them, and the bond in my chest was warm in a way it had not been in 5 years, like a room that someone has finally come back and lit a fire in. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I need you to know that. I'm not asking for anything tonight or tomorrow or because of what happened out there. What I said to you in Millhaven stands." "I know," she said. "But I want you to know, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm not the same man who let you leave without going after you. I've had 5 years to become something better, and I've worked on it. Not because I expected you back, but because you were right and I knew it, and growing up late is better than not growing up." She looked at me for a long, careful moment. "I know that too," she said. "I've been watching you this week with them." A pause. "You're good with them." "They're easy to be good with," I said. "Fen has very strong opinions about pottery and Ro asks honest questions. What's not to like?" She smiled. It was the first full smile I had seen from her, uncomplicated by caution, and it came from low in her chest the way I remembered, and arrived without warning the way it always had. And my wolf went still inside me in the quiet way of something that has found what it was looking for and no longer needs to search. "I'd like to stay a little longer," she said, "if that's still the offer, not because of the threat. I want to know you better. I want them to know you better. And I think—" She looked at the garden, at the stone walls lit softly by the garden light. "I think I've been protecting myself from finding out who you became, and that's not fair to either of us." "Stay as long as you want," I said. "No conditions." She nodded, looked back at her cup. "He called you Fen," I said. "Because he's like a fern, grows toward light." She blinked. "How do you know that?" "I asked Petro," I said. She laughed, the full laugh, low in the chest, arriving without warning. It landed somewhere inside me that had been a quiet room for 5 years and filled it like light. "Of course you did," she said. We stayed there for a long time, talking, not about the bond or the future or the things that still needed to be resolved between us. We talked about the boys, mostly, Alara telling me things I had missed, filling in the years with the small particular details that are the actual substance of a life. The night Ro had a fever for 3 days, and she had slept in his doorway on the floor because she couldn't make herself go farther. The morning Fen decided that his shoes were unnecessary and conducted a 3-week campaign against their use. The first time they looked at each other after a fight, both of them trying to stay angry and both of them failing, the laugh beginning before either of them could help it. I listened. I asked questions when I had them, and I was quiet when I did not. I was learning the years I had missed, one story at a time, and it was not a comfortable thing. There was a grief in it, an awareness of all the evenings I was not in, all the laughter I had not heard, but it was also something else. It was her choosing to give it to me. She did not have to tell me these things. She could have kept them, the way people keep things from those who forfeited the right to know. But she was not like that. She had never been like that, and 5 years had not changed it. She told me the stories of my sons' lives, and she handed them to me carefully, one by one, like someone giving someone else something precious and wanting to make sure it arrived intact. "Fen talks to animals," she said at one point. "What animals?" "All of them, any animal he encounters. He has very serious conversations with them. The cat at Petra's stall, a pigeon in the market last spring, a particularly patient horse at the edge of town." She looked at the garden wall, which I noticed now had a small row of stones along the bottom edge that had not been there before, placed with intention, evenly spaced. Ro's work, I suspected. He doesn't expect them to talk back. He just informs them of things he thinks they should know. What does he tell them? The structural integrity of whatever he's currently building, his opinions on weather. Once he explained to the pigeon that seeds were a better diet than what it had been eating. A pause. I don't know how he knows what a pigeon had been eating. He pays attention, I said. He pays attention to everything, she said. It's remarkable and exhausting in equal measure. And Ro? She smiled, softer this time. Ro understands people. He watches them the way some children watch television, completely absorbed, trying to figure out what's really happening underneath what they're showing. He's going to be dangerous when he's older. The smile shifted, became something more complicated. He's going to be like you. The comparison landed quietly. I did not deflect it. Then I hope he learns faster than I did, I said. She looked at me. He'll have you to learn from, she said. That's the difference. We stayed in the garden until the chill became too much and the cup was empty, and the night had gone from late to very late. We said goodnight at the door of the west wing, her door, hers, and she went inside, and I stood in the corridor for a moment and let myself feel the shape of the evening. The bond was steady. My wolf was calm, not the forced calm of suppression, not the brittle stillness of absence, but the real calm of a wolf who has oriented himself to the right direction and is content to take the journey at the right speed. I had moved on after she left. That is what I had told myself. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. The truth was that I had been waiting, without knowing how to call it waiting, and the waiting was over, and what came next was not about reclaiming what we had been, but about becoming something neither of us had been before, not the careless alpha and the patient woman, but two people who had learned the shape of their own failures and were choosing, carefully, with full knowledge of the costs, to try again. Fenn's fortress was still standing in the garden the next morning. Someone had added a stick to it, placed with precision, clearly a structural addition rather than an accident. I crouched beside it before anyone else was awake and studied the architecture for a long time. He was 3 years old, and he built things that lasted. I sat on the garden stones in the early light and I thought, there it is. There is the thing I missed the first time, the simple sustained work of building something that holds, one stick at a time, early in the morning before the world gets loud. I was not going to miss it again. I had been in the garden for about 20 minutes when I heard the keep begin to stir. The kitchen staff at first, distant sounds, the first hour of the morning beginning its work. Then birds in the garden trees. Then the particular sound of 2 small people negotiating the stairs, which involved considerable debate that I could hear without making out the words. I stayed where I was. I stayed in the garden until I heard small footsteps on the stone path, and Fenn appeared in his pajamas, hair sideways from sleep, and stopped when he saw me crouching beside his fortress. He studied me, studied his fortress. Then he came over, sat cross-legged on the stones beside me, and regarded his construction critically. "It needs a gate," he announced. "Agreed," I said. "Can you help?" "I can try." He nodded as if this were satisfactory. He had a small pile of sticks at the side of his construction, a supply depot, I realized, organized by approximate size, and he sorted through them with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. He selected 2 of similar length and handed them to me without ceremony. "Those are the posts," he explained. "They have to be even, or the gate will be crooked." "Understood," I said. I sat down cross-legged on the cold stones beside him and held the posts in position while he found the crosspiece. We worked in silence for a few minutes, a real working silence, the kind that comes from 2 people focused on the same task, and I was absurdly moved by it. By the smallness of the task and the seriousness with which he approached it, and the simple fact of sitting on the ground with my son in the early morning while Ashford Keep woke up around us. Roe appeared 15 minutes in. He had a coat on over his pajamas, which was the only concession to the morning chill he seemed willing to make, and he came and stood at the edge of the construction site and surveyed the progress. "The gate is crooked," he said. "It's not crooked," Fen said. "It's a little crooked," I said. Fen looked at me with a betrayed expression, then at the gate, then reluctantly back at me. "How do we fix it?" "Move the left post back slightly," Roe said. He had apparently decided to contribute from a supervisory position. We adjusted the left post, the gate leveled. "Better," Roe said. Fen examined it for a long moment, then made a small sound that I recognized, even from this limited acquaintance, as the sound of a person who has acknowledged that someone else's suggestion was correct without actually saying so out loud. He straightened two of the inner walls and added a small stone at the base of the right post for structural support. I heard the door behind us. Alara appeared in the garden doorway with a coat over her shoulders and her hair still half from sleep, and she stopped when she saw the three of us on the stones, me and Fen and Roe, working on the fortress in the early light. She looked at us for a long moment. I could not read her expression from across the garden, but she was not moving away. Fen noticed her. "Mum, we're fixing the gate." "I can see that," she said. She came and sat on the garden bench, the same bench from the night before, and wrapped her coat closer and watched the three of us work. We worked for another half hour. The gate was completed, improved, and debated extensively. Roe contributed 3 additional structural recommendations, 2 of which Fen accepted, and 1 of which he rejected on aesthetic grounds. The fortress, by the time the keep's morning had fully arrived, was considerably more defensible than it had been at dawn. I sat on the cold stones of Ashford Keep's garden in the early morning, and I helped my son build a gate. It was, I decided, the best decision I had ever made. Not the gate specifically, though the gate was good work and I was not embarrassed by my contribution to it. Not even the morning exactly, though the morning was a gift I had not expected and did not take lightly. The decision I meant was the one I had made at the oak tree bench in Millhaven, the one I had made when I said I am not asking for anything. When I chose, deliberately, to put down the reflex toward claiming and commanding and moving fast, and to pick up instead the slower, harder, more necessary thing, the willingness to show up and stay, and let the work speak for itself, one morning at a time. I had moved on after she left. That was what I had told myself and everyone else for 5 years. I had been functional. I had been competent. I had been the alpha king in every room I entered. But I had not been present, not in the way that mattered, not in the way that the small boy beside me on the stones was present, fully engaged, fully invested, certain that this gate was worth getting right even if it was only sticks on the ground in a garden no one else would ever see. My sons had been built from whatever I was before Alara left. They had been given the best of what we had made together in those 4 months, her steadiness, her warmth, her way of telling a hard truth without cruelty, and they had been shaped by 5 years of her raising them alone. They were extraordinary. They were going to be extraordinary men. I was going to try to be worthy of that. Fen placed the final stone at the entrance of the fortress gate and sat back and looked at his work with the deep satisfaction of a person who has completed a thing correctly. "Done," he announced. "Done," I agreed. He looked at me sideways. "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" I looked at him, at his serious dark eyes that were mine in a face that was not. At the certainty in the question, not fearful, not pleading, just practical. A child who was accustomed to the world being a manageable place, asking a manageable question, expecting a straight answer. "Yes," I said, "I'm going to be here tomorrow." He nodded once, apparently satisfied, and stood up to go find breakfast. Roe lingered a moment longer. He looked at me with the same focused, reading attention he had given everything since I arrived, taking my temperature from a short distance, measuring something I could not name. Then, without saying anything, he put his hand briefly on my arm, just for a moment. Then he turned and followed his brother inside. I sat in the garden after they were gone. The morning had come fully now, light in the garden, the keep sounds around me, the fortress standing on the stones between me and the door. Alara was still on the bench. She had been quiet through most of the last hour, just watching, and now she was watching me. "He doesn't do that," she said. "What?" "Touch people he doesn't trust," she said. "Ro, he doesn't. He keeps his distance until he's decided." She paused. "He's decided." I looked at the hand on my arm, where her son had rested his for a moment. The bond in my chest was warm. My wolf was still, completely still, the way he had been going still over and over since Millhaven, but the quality of it kept changing. Not the dormant stillness of absence, not the focused stillness of threat. This was something else. The stillness of a wolf who has arrived where he was going, and is simply present, fully, in the place where he belongs. I had moved on after she left. 5 years of it, stone by stone, building the wall of functional living over the place where the warmth had been. But I had not, it turned out, moved very far. I was still exactly where I had been when she left. I had just finally, at a market in Millhaven on an autumn morning, turned around and started walking back.